Hey, it's Mel, and today I'm doing a fantasy recommendations video. I think I have 11 books to talk about in this video, so I'll just get started. The first fantasy book that I want to recommend to everyone is The Warrior Heir by Cinda Williams Chimer. I read this ages ago. It's basically about this teenage boy who takes this heart medication and then he doesn't take it one day and then magic starts to happen, and then he realizes he's from this long line of magic people and he's a warrior, and then there's this whole lore about how everyone gets a stone put in their chest and that determines what type of magic person they are, whether they're a warrior, a wizard or a mage. And he kind of goes on a road trip with his aunt and things happen and people are trying to kill him. It's the first book in a series that follows different people in the fantasy world. I have only read the first book, but when it was the Booksplosion Book of the Month, I think I read it the month after. But I really enjoyed it, and I haven't read quite a high level fantasy like that a lot. The next book that I want to talk about is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is an amazing book. It's written so well, it has all of the different types of perspective, first, second and third, and it's about the circus that only opens up when it's nighttime and it travels the world, and there are these amazing tents and it's absolutely fascinating, and it does the entire story of how it was made and who's involved, and it follows like 5 different main characters, and it's just beautiful and amazing and it's really important. The next book that I'm going to talk about is possibly my favourite series. I'm not quite sure on that, but that is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater, the first book in the Raven Cycle series. If you haven't read this, it's amazing. It's YA paranormal fantasy, so there's like spirits, and the main character, her parents, well, her mum and all of her mum's family are psychics, but she's kind of dormant, but she amplifies people. And she's been told since she was 6 that when she finds her true love, if she kisses him, he will die. And kind of intense. It's also like there are this group of friends that are also amazing and love each other so much. And I know I talk about this book so much, I just love it so much. And there was a lot more magic and fantasy elements than I was actually expecting. Also, if you want something about like the ley lines and the Welsh kings and stuff that happened a very long time ago integrated into a fantasy setting, you might want to try this. The next book that I want to talk about is Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. This is the first book in the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy, which I love, and it's just amazing. It's basically following this girl who half the time lives as an art student in Prague, I think, and then the other half of the time she serves these chimeras, which are half human, or like part human and then mixed with other animals. And then something happens to all of the doors, which are like the portals between the worlds, and she's kind of trapped out, and she discovers things about herself, and it's just a beautiful fantasy thing. And then it has this whole world that it just builds up, and it's one of those things where it's like this fantasy element could explain this real life thing of the vision of demons and angels, and it's just really interesting. It's definitely one of my favourite fantasy series that I've ever read. The next book is also in the series because it's kind of hard to find good standalone fantasy books, and that is the Grisha trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. This is the 3rd book, Ronin Rising. Haven't actually read this one, I've read the first 2, but it's just great. It's got this world where there are Grishas, and Grishas basically have these different types of powers, and the main character has this power where she's like the sun summoner and she can do light and heat, and there's this guy called the Darkling who does darkness and coldness, and they're kind of contrasting. It's one of the more high fantasy things that I've read, and also I think it's set in Russia or somewhere like that, but like a fantasy version of it. These books just feel like homey and comfortable. Like, I have good memories of this series, and it's a good time. The next book is kind of a different one, and that is Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. This is basically like, this is the novel version of the fan fiction that was in the book Fangirl, which was written because of all of the fangirls of Harry Potter, so it's kind of linked to everything else. You can read it on its own. It definitely holds up as its own thing, but it helps if you've been a fan of the Harry Potter series. It has a lot of commentary on the Harry Potter series, like the relationship between Dumbledore and Harry and why there aren't any queer other than Dumbledore, but that doesn't really count because he's not actually said anything about it, and people of colour in the Harry Potter universe. And it's really quite a cool book. It has dragon in it, it has spells, like it has its own fantasy lore, even though it was written by this writer who only really does contemporary, but Rainbow Rowell is a really good author, and it wasn't as heavy on the romance as you'd think it would be. The next recommended fantasy book that I have to talk about is Ash by Malinda Lo. This is actually in a duology that take place in the same universe fantasy wise, but I haven't read the other one, and this is a retelling of Cinderella where there are fairies and a huntress and bisexual protagonist for the win. Like at the start it's really obvious that it's a retelling of Cinderella, and then you move through it and it's like, oh, fairies and ghosts, fairies and things, that's interesting. It was one of the first really fantasy things that I ever read, and it was really good. I think it's a really underrated book on BookTube. I've only seen it talked about like twice. The next book I talk about quite a lot because it is one of my faves, and that is The Dark Spell of the Forest by Holly Black. I just really love this book. It's more of a realistic fantasy setting, and there are also fairies in this. It's more of a everyone in the village knows that there's fairies, like it's common knowledge, instead of a I'm a fairy and I have to keep this secret thing. It's about this girl and her brother, and they both get entangled in this fairy's life because there's this fairy in a glass coffin, and then it's really weird. It's just a really cool thing that's kind of different to the other ways that you've seen fantasy and fairies and stuff. It's just real good. The next book that I want to talk about is Rebel Belle by Rachel Hawkins. This is the first book in a trilogy, I believe, about this girl who goes to prom, goes to the bathroom, and then this guy comes in and dies and kisses her, and it's really weird. And then she may or may not kill a teacher, and then she realises that she has to protect the one guy in the entire school that she's not very fond of, and she kind of turns into Buffy but without the vampires. I really love this series. It's like one of those things where there's a romance but I don't find it that annoying. I read the second one, I loved it, and I can't wait for the third one. This is also one of the more magical realism ones with a very urban setting. The next book I want to talk about is The Coldest Girl in Cold Town by Holly Black. I know I've already talked about Holly Black, but her writing is just amazing, and The Coldest Girl in Cold Town is a vampire book that made me really like vampires, and now I really want to write a vampire book. That's not the point. The point is it's amazing. It's about vampires. It's just so good. Basically, this girl wakes up and everyone at the party that she was in died, and vampires are just like this thing that people are aware of, and they're like, shut your doors at night and lock everything so the vampires don't like kill you like what happened at the party. And then she kind of runs away with her ex-boyfriend and a vampire, and they go to this place called a cold town, which is where vampires, people who have been bitten and are cold, or people who just like really like vampires in kind of a weird way, go, and they're basically these towns that have been locked off from civilization. Basically, if you like fantasy, you should read Holly Black. And the last book that I'm going to talk about is also a series, but I've only read the one book in it, even though I have 3 books so far, and that is Throne of Glass by Sarah J Maas. I just really need to read the rest of these. Basically, it's amazing. I doubt that people haven't read it other than me. It's about this girl who was a prisoner, and she's taken by the prince and this other guy to compete in this contest to be the king's assassin, like killing people for the king, and this girl's like really tough, and it's a lot higher fantasy than most things I've ever read. It's super cool, and I know loads of people love it. So those were all of the fantasy recommendations that I had and all the books I want to talk about. I hope you enjoyed, and if you have any recommendations for me, I would really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed. Bye!